And that's me demonstrating how to unmute yourself. Good. Good evening. Noswaita. Bonsoir. Guten Abend. Habari Zanzuri, I think it is. And welcome to the third of our Double Vision discussion evenings. Whether you're on Zoom Live, as our intrepid group are here, or whether you're watching on YouTube later, one of the literally dozens who join us, we're very glad that you've joined the discussion this evening. In case you're someone who's missed our last two such evenings, you can catch up on YouTube on the St. David's Uniting Church channel. But essentially, we decided to put on these evenings in response to the increasing polarization of views across society, as we so tragically witnessed afresh this month in one of the most vitriolic and depressing elections ever seen in America. And though perhaps more extreme in nature in the States than here in Wales, we're not invulnerable to the same temptation to stick with what and who we know, to read the newspapers with whom we agree, and to get stuck in silos, assuming that everyone thinks like us or that they should. So each month we're inviting two wonderful guest speakers, at least one of whom is outside of the Christian tradition, to reflect on the hot topics from differing points of view, to share their outlook and to answer our questions on issues about which they have some expertise or experience. It's an opportunity to listen to different perspectives, to think about different subjects that we might not otherwise come across. And tonight we deal with one of the few subjects that is still taboo in many circles today. Tonight we are taking a look at death. The British economist John Maynard Keynes once famously noted that in the long run, we are all dead. And whilst that may be true, whilst death is a destination at which we shall all one day arrive, it's not generally something that we like to dwell on, at least in our society anyway. Even those of us who do believe in a life beyond death often find it hard to talk about or face. And whether it's the death of strangers in foreign climes, or that of our loved ones, or even the task of facing our own mortality, very often we sweep the subject under the carpet and distract ourselves with the latest reality TV show instead. Well, tonight we can do both. But before we get to Ant and Dec and their current cohort, we'll spend this next hour and a bit taking a peek behind the wizard's curtain as we open Pandora's box, mix metaphors with wild abandonment, and reflect with honesty about this difficult of topics. And as I said to those who were on Zoom earlier, if you're watching this on YouTube, do practice self-care as we talk about this. Whether that means for you taking time out, pausing the talk at some point and having a few minutes out, or whether it means phoning a friend afterwards or going for a walk, whatever you need to do to look after yourself as we talk about this. And to guide us by the hand as we wade into these turbulent waters, we have two stupendous speakers for you this evening. First, we will hear from a good friend of Castle Square, Sue Jickles. Sue is a generally wonderful human being who has worked in a variety of social care settings over the years and who offers bereavement counselling with the equally brilliant Castle Court Funeral Home. A follower of the Buddhist path, Sue approaches her work with deep thought, welcome humour, and real empathy. Sue, thank you for joining us this evening. It is a joy to have you with us, and I do look forward to what you've got to say. You're on mute, so any nice things you're saying we can't hear yet, but we'll hear from you in a second. And our second speaker is no stranger to our churches, being a former minister and current church member of St. David's Uniting Church, as well as moderator of the URC Synod of Wales. And so we welcome Simon Walkling tonight. Simon is an incredibly pastoral minister who wears a number of hats, all of them with great flair. But tonight we particularly wanted to hear from him because of his academic study on the subject of dying and death, and because of his experience as a hospice chaplain. Having already seen some of what Simon is going to share with us this evening, I know we're in for a thought-provoking evening. So, two compassionate colossi, two amazing speakers tonight. And for those of you on Zoom, their involvement is key as well. This is why on YouTube, it is a wonderful thing. You'll learn so much this evening, but if you join us on Zoom, you get to take part in the discussions as well. So I'll remind everyone, YouTubers and Zoomers, how it's going to work. Each speaker has around 10 minutes to share with us their perspective on the subject. We try and keep it deliberately broad so that they can bring whatever they feel would be interesting from their experience and their expertise. After that, we'll have a time of group discussion with a few questions for the group to think about, and we'll finish with questions to our two speakers. And so throughout the evening, our Zoomers are encouraged to send any questions to me, and we'll feed them back to the speakers at the end. So guest speakers, group chat, questions and answers, and we'll all be done by 9 o'clock so we can cheer on Russell Watson as he kisses a snake or whatever he will be doing tonight on I'm a Celebrity. But to kick us off and to share with us some of her perspectives on the topic, it is my great pleasure to hand over to Sue. And at this point, you'll need to unmute yourself, and then you're done for good then. We currently can't see you, Sue, which is, now we can. And we wait with bated breath. And there we go.
Have I got voice?
Perfect, yeah. Perfect.
Well,
I'm mute myself, and so it's all on you.
Thank you very much for that fantastic introduction, Phil. I hope I can live up to it. I'm feeling a little bit jangly in the nerve department, but I think that's natural. And I'm here just to tell you a little bit about my personal experience and my journey with Castlecourt Funeral Home, which began in 2002. So we, as a family business, we decided to offer an aftercare service, not strictly bereavement counselling. We've done lots of different things. I've advocated for people, I've written letters of support with housing, I've helped people with debt. It's been a variety of things, and I've learned so much from the people I've met. But my personal experience of death started 32 years ago when my sister died very young, and set me on the path to Buddhism, which I've been on ever since, really. I've dipped in and out, and I've got a very broad view on religion and spirituality, and I try not to, it doesn't get incorporated into my counselling relationships unless there's expressed interest by the people I'm speaking with. So how it's helped me really is my own experience. My sister wasn't prepared for death, and none of the family were prepared for death. And as a consequence of that, we stumbled through the most horrendous year, all of it in our own pain and misery, and not really being able to reach out to each other. And it was only after the event that I realised that it helped me to learn and become more aware of different people's unique reaction to grief and loss, which differ enormously from family to family, person to person. So the things I've learned everything I've learned has been from the people I've spent time with in a counselling relationship, whether that's informal or formal. I can be very specific in how people would like me to interact with them. So I've just learned to listen, which is a skill that my Buddhist teachings and my Buddhist learnings have helped me enormously with, because it's just being totally present in the moment with the person while they work their way through a myriad emotions. And despite all the training I've had and all the books I've read of stages of grief, there's many, and there's lots of varied theories. I find that the people I met have taught me about their grief and how they grieve, and it can be all of the stages all at once, and they can tumble about all over the place, and it can be really difficult. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened there. Sorry. And it's just sitting with people while they work their way through those feelings. And I often hear people say that time heals, and I don't know whether that's the truth. I think allowing yourself to grieve is the thing that lets healing take place. I think many years can pass, and I can still see my own family who've lost, you know, their daughter, their sister, their aunt, their mother, and I can still see grief there after all these years, and that's 30 years. And sometimes you just can't find a way through, and it has to be an individual journey. So a lot of people have found comfort in writing journals, in creative writing, in learning how to meditate, learning how to be more fully in the moment, and learning to embrace a different relationship with the person they've lost. Because often it leaves such a big gap, and people do flounder. It's hard to know what to do when you've lost somebody who maybe you've been with for a long, long time. And so I think the main thing that has helped me is that life and death are one, and they're both part of the same journey. And we, as human beings, we embrace that as much as we can, but we also have to face our own fears as well. And I think that's a big issue, because one of my biggest fears growing up was death, all the way through my childhood. And it wasn't until I lost my sister that I finally faced that fear. And I think they're the things that underlie our own experience of grief, is our own fears and the things that we might hide from ourselves, or the things we're not always conscious of, which stay buried. And we might know they're there and we might be aware of them, but we just push them away and we might distract ourselves. But they do come through, and the body has an amazing intuition for when we need to express what needs to be expressed. And our body knows when it's time for us to grieve as well. Sometimes it can give us, we can be numbed to our feelings, because the body needs time and the mind to take in what has happened and to really fully grasp what has happened. And that can take several months. And of all the people I've met, the consistent theme through everybody, through every relationship, is that it's validating how they're feeling and how they've coped with loss and what their experience has been and what is unearthed for them. And it might be past grief, it might be grief from many, many moons ago, which is only just come to the surface at another time of crisis and loss. Because, like Simon said, the analogy with the map and the fist is excellent, because it does completely turn your world upside down. And nothing's ever the same again. It's like shaking a snow globe, and everything settles and the world is different. And it's different because you've lost somebody you love. And then you have to negotiate all the feelings that come with that. And there's the acceptable feelings. Everybody is okay with people feeling sorrow and deep pain. But there's other emotions. There's anger that people have a lot of trouble expressing, which are equally as valid as any other emotion. Guilt, the amount of people I have met who have felt terrible guilt for things that they really didn't have any full control over. And they could be tiny little things. And these are the things that people talk about, and these are the things that people come to accept themselves. It's about self-acceptance as well as accepting that life is different, that we can learn to have a different relationship with the people we love, and we can do that in a variety of different ways. And I think that's what death taught me. When I lost my sister, who I'd had a very volatile relationship with, after the event, I turned myself inside out with remorse and guilt and regret. And all I wanted to do was go back and make it okay again. But it's about coming to a point where you accept that you can't. There's nothing. You can't change anything that's happened. You can only change and view it differently from now. And that was one of my biggest lessons, I think. And I think it's an honour to listen to people, and I feel quite humbled as well that we have the opportunity, and we can provide a service, and we can also provide it to a community who have been so kind to us. Because Andrew and I both feel that being of service is something that we deeply respect about ourselves. It's something we've chosen actively to do. and it's an absolute privilege. And the final point I wanted to make is I haven't got any hard and fast answers. I'm not an expert about grief or death or dying. I can only fully know my own experience of loss and my own experience of grief, and I can sit and be with somebody else as they work their way through that, and that's always an honour. And I absolutely love what I do. And I think I've had my 10 minutes, and thank you all for listening.
Oh, Sue, there's so much there. I think we could all listen for a lot longer. And I look forward to being able to do that when we ask you some questions later.
Thank you.
Thank you, especially for bringing, you know, your personal experience with your sister and sharing us, and you know, looking the advantage of Zoom, you know, looking at people's faces, and there's a lot of, I think, of empathy and understanding of some of our experiences. None are ever the same, but
no,
of relationships, you know, of loved ones we've lost, and the guilt and the, oh, if only I could have told them this, or only I could have done that. And how we can tear ourselves apart thinking that through. But there was so much there, you know, that I'd love to come back to, and maybe we will in the questions. The image of the snow globe being shaken and seeing how that settles. But for me, we talked about how the importance of just listening. And one of my favorite theologians, you know, says to listen is to love. And I think, you know, in your words, you really, you brought that out. And I can't help but ever relate something to a film. So apologies, everyone. And this is a film that I lent to Andrew, and I don't know if you watched it as well, Sue, Lars and the Real Girl.
I did.
It's just a stunning parable about grief. And we watched it at a minister summer school a couple of years ago as well, and I've made all of my friends watch it under duress. But there's a wonderful bit in that relates to what you said, because you said, you know, the honor of just sitting with people, because often, you know, in grief, people want to do something or say something, but just to sit with them. And there's a bit in the film in which Lars, who is grieving, some women from his church actually go around with food and just sit, and they're knitting away. And he says, what do I do now? And they say, nothing, just eat. You know, we've come just round to sit and to eat, because that's what people do when tragedy strikes. And I think there's something really beautiful in that. And your words really, you know, resonated with that kind of love. So thank you, Sue. I look forward to hearing from you from more in a few minutes.
Thank you.
For now, to continue us on this theme, and perhaps to explain to the YouTubers, or to recap to the YouTubers about the background, it is my great joy to hand over to Simon.
Okay, I'll explain about the background in a bit, but to begin, I just want to say that death's a simple word to say, but difficult to talk about. I think it links into our views of what it means to be a person, to live a meaningful life, and how the universe works. I find it challenging because, as Sue said of herself when she was growing up, I'm afraid of death. Some of my childhood nightmares came after seeing the film Run Wild, Run Free, with a hooded skeleton riding across Dartmoor. And more recently, my physical reaction, Sue mentioned about the body keeping the score, my physical reaction to my mum's death made me realize that thinking about death is more complicated than having ideas about death. So death is multifaceted, and my initial page of preparation notes was so complicated that I've decided to just give you 8 statements about death. 8 because it's the number of resurrection, the first day of new life and the new week. And it's not really a coherent overview of my thinking, but you might see one linking into the next. I recognize that giving 8 statements is quite a white male way of tackling this introduction, and that others would resonate better with personal stories and metaphors. However, I think I've chosen these statements because some of our public debates around death and the issues relating to death distort or exaggerate one or more of these statements. So the first statement is death is a natural part of life, but it also names the end of a biological life. And there's a disconnect when we mix conversations about dealing with death with a capital D in general and listening to someone talk about a specific death. And we need to be careful and full of care. 2, death appears to cut across all meaning and purpose, and that's what the background's about. Our internal wall falls apart. I often describe our kind of coping with life that we've got inside us a map that helps us to navigate our way through life, and the important people are like big landmarks on the map, and they help us to find our way through the world. And it's as though death puts a fist through the map and our world is turned upside down. And this threatens a sense of pointlessness, and resisting that threat to all meaning and purpose is part of our reactions to death. Think about how often you hear about people remembering the remembrance season, or campaigning after a tragedy, or setting up a charity so that someone's death has not been in vain. Or on the other hand, think about existential philosophers trying to embrace the lack of meaning which death brings. Third statement. Our processes around death are to contain the chaos that we feel when death happens. So this includes rituals, funeral arrangements, and all the bureaucracy around it, and even sorting through people's stuff. All of these work at different levels to move someone from being among the living to taking their place with the ancestors. And you see that even in ancient communities. And there was stuff even on the radio this morning about grieving Neanderthals. And it moves the dead from being among the living to taking place with the ancestors in the view of society, and perhaps much later on in our own minds. 4, death can be resisted, denied, or embraced. These different reactions are reflected in the picture of death with a scythe personified as a threat. Or you think of the reading, death is nothing at all, and other readings which aim to give comfort by pretending that death really doesn't mean anything. And then you think of the embracing of death. St. Francis' Canticle of the Sun, which we have in one of our hymns. Thou most and kind and gentle death, waiting to hush our latest breath. Thou leadest home the child of God, and Christ our Lord the way has trod. 5, our understanding of death is linked to our understanding of what it means to be a person. We're social as well as biological beings. Sometimes we talk as if we were the sum of our memories or the sum of our actions. Others describe us as simply a random collection of atoms, or a link in an evolutionary chain. We're also like a connecting person in a network of lots of different relationships. And I think in the same way, our image of any afterlife is linked to what we see as being the purpose of life. Interesting little book called Some, which is 40 different versions of stories about different afterlives that link in with ideas about what this life is all about. And I see this as part of coping with our continuity of memory and emotion when somebody dies, but the discontinuity of their physical presence. Statement 6, the biblical understanding of the afterlife is not consistent. Psalm 115 says, the dead don't praise the Lord. In Maccabees, the martyrs are to be resurrected for giving their lives. And the New Testament sees new life as God's gift, while some of the parables include images of wailing and gnashing of teeth. In some verses, we're viewed as bodies that are animated by the Spirit, that the Spirit breathes life into flesh. And in others, it's like a soul embodied in flesh, almost trapped in the flesh. Death is described both as a gateway to life with God in heaven and as a sleeping, awaiting the general resurrection of the dead. I see these different emphases as being about the promise of fulfillment, the promise of fulfillment for each of us as individuals and the renewal of our communal life. But I cling to the promise that nothing in life and death can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus, and that death does not end a relationship with God that we begin now. Statement 7. Talking about death hides the reality that not every death is treated the same. Context is significant. The natural end of a well-lived life feels different to a sudden death in a road accident. Reactions to death from coronavirus in the UK is different to the way we tackle children dying every 3 seconds from preventable diseases in developing countries. Last statement, number 8. Talking about death is not always helpful. I think it's more helpful to talk about dying and coping with others dying. It's more helpful to talk about verbs rather than nouns, about what we have to do rather than how we name it. For me, this involves grieving, which I think of as adjusting to loss. Those of us who know when we're getting nearer death can do the work of grieving for the loss of our life, as one by one we let go of the roles that have given us purpose and perhaps come to terms with regrets. Ira Byock, in his book Dying Well, identifies 5 actions of relationship completion. He gives them statements saying in various ways, I forgive you, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, and goodbye. Those of us who are coping with the death of loved ones have to let go of them, or rather relocate them in the place of memories in our internal map, rather than in the place of physical presence in our daily living. And in that process, we redraw our internal map of the world. Basically, I see grief as harmonizing our internal view of the world with the external reality, and that takes both emotional and spiritual work. So I'm grateful for this opportunity, because talking about dying and coping with other people dying helps us to prepare ourselves for when it happens. To grieve, but not without hope, as Paul writes to the Thessalonians. To live, knowing that there is life beyond death and life beyond grief, gathered in God's love, even when we're not aware of it. Thank you.
Whew. I don't know what words can follow that. Thank you, Simon. To tiptoe through, to skip through kind of theology, psychology, sociology with such a deftness of touch as you have is huge food for thought. And there's, I think we could probably have a discussion evening on each one of those 8 statements. In preparing for this evening, when I was in communication with Simon, I said, as a white male, I also like the 8-point list, and it was Simon who said he just apologized it wasn't alliterative, which is my sin, and I confess. But no, there's so much there from that whole question of, how are we resisting or denying or embracing death, and how that can change possibly even day to day, let alone from different stages in our life. And the honesty about the inconsistency of death and the afterlife within Christian scripture is always refreshing to hear. I think people of all faiths and none can often give trite answers when it comes to death and people who are grieving. We hear things like God needed another angel, or only the good die young, or that these statements which aren't helpful, and I don't think come from our faith, which might be well-meaning, and it certainly makes me think of some good friends of mine, and I've shared this before, who the husband and father of 2 young children died of a brain tumor before he was 30. And one of the presents that someone bought for the kids the following Christmas was just a ball saying, "Smile, God loves you." And whilst my friend who had a faith would believe in some of that, she said every time she saw it, she just wanted to stick a knife in the ball, because that's not what she was feeling at the time. So thank you, Simon, for the honesty and weaving all those things together, and we might unweave them in the questions and answers. So that brings us to that time. So I think because we're more of a snug group today, we might just have one group when Claire puts us into a group. And Simon and Sue and Claire and I will be taken away to the green room, where we have platters of food and copious amounts of drink awaiting us. But for the rest of you, we will have some questions. And for you on YouTube, we have some questions for you to consider, which hopefully shall be coming to our screen any time now. And while they are, I've got them on here in case they don't. Fabulous. So here are the questions that we'd like you, whether on your own on YouTube or in your group in a second, to consider. Question 1, do you remember how you first encountered death? If you're willing to share this, and what was that like? Question 2, does what you think about a possible afterlife affect how you live? If so, how? Question 3, dealing with dying is about grieving, even for the person dying. Do you agree? And question 4, the last great enemy is death. It's quite a similar quote to one that comes from the Game of Thrones, but that actually is from the Bible, from the first letter to the church in Corinth, one of the many varied statements on death within the Bible. Do you view death as an enemy, as a friend, or as something other? So we're going to have time to think about those. What I encourage is that until 10 past, so for those on Zoom, for the next 3 minutes, have some time to think through those questions. The introverts among us don't want to go straight into discussion. So either just spend some time on your own to think through those questions, or go and make yourself a cup of tea, or get yourself a glass of wine or water or whatever you choose. And then at 10 past, Claire will put us in the groups, so we have some time to discuss. You'll have 20 minutes, so about 5 minutes per question, but there might be other questions that come up during that time. Feel free to digress. And if there are any other questions you'd like me to ask Simon and Sue, please either send it on the chat or WhatsApp or text, and I can ask them, and we will do that. But for the next 3 minutes, have a break, and you can regather at 10 past when we be put in our groups. Well, we are back. So welcome back to the YouTubers, and our Zoomers are back in the room. And so I hope the Zoomers had a good chat. I'm sure you could have talked for a lot longer on all the issues. And hopefully those on YouTube were able to have a think about those questions. So now we've got a time to ask a few questions to our speakers. And the first one I'm going to ask to both of them is connected to that very first question that, well, one of those questions that we asked the group to think about. So to Sue, we'll ask first, then Simon. How have your beliefs on death and a possible afterlife impacted on the way you live, particularly in regard to your care of the dying or the bereaved? So whether you take it as a two-parter or focus on that, it's up to you. Over to you first, Sue.
Right. It's impacted in every area of my life, death. And the work I've done throughout my career as a social worker and later as a bereavement counsellor with Castle Court. It sounds very cliched, but death has taught me more than all the years I'd lived before experiencing death. I've learnt more since that moment when my sister passed away. I've learnt more from my sister when she was no longer present in the physical sense. And when I do meditate on death, one of the things I meditate on particularly is feeling grateful and blessed in my life. And my sister gave that to me as a gift. It felt very much like that at the time. So whenever we meet anybody at Castle Court, whoever it is, whoever crosses over our threshold, that person is part of us and is part of our experience and is part of our journey with that family. And I can honestly say this, and the same goes for Andrew. It could be our own sister, our own father, our own grandfather, uncle, child, and we very much have the respect of those families and those people very much in our hearts. And we don't have to be blood related to feel that connection and that sense of belonging to a community of people. And Buddhism in particular, which isn't a religion, it's a philosophy and it's a science. And the Buddha always would say, just try it and see. Nobody's trying to make you do anything. Nobody's trying to force a belief on you. It's just the appliance of scientific fact in everyday life, which in Castle Court, when I'm with somebody who's passed away, it feels like, almost like, it's a humbling and an experience that I find is sacred. It's like a sacred experience. And I often, when I'm with somebody who has passed away, I can often, in the energy and in the air around me, which further reinforces my beliefs, I can feel that sense of that person. And to me, they're very much still present. And that's how we are at Castle Court. And I feel wonderful about that. But death taught me that. Death reawakened and cultivated those feelings, deeper feelings and values within me, which were hidden until then. I'm not saying I didn't have them, but they weren't to the forefront of my mind and my heart like they are now. And they feed into everything I do as a staff at Castle Court, when I'm making tea, or when I'm lying in the coffin, or when I'm sitting with a family who are so distraught they don't know what to do next. So it feeds into everything, and it's inseparable. A deep belief and a deep faith and a deeper value and belief system. And I do thank my sister Julie for starting that journey, and particularly with Buddhism, because if it hadn't been for losing her at such a young age with so many children, she had 5 children who were left behind, that's what put me on that path. And those seeds are, we all have that goodness within us. And sometimes a trauma such as losing a loved one, it can accelerate your growth spiritually like nothing else on this earth. And that's what death has taught me. And, I'm forever grateful for that. And that's the first thing I do in the morning when I wake up, is I count my blessings and thank the universe for the day that's going to unfold. And I do live each day literally as if it's the last in my own personal life. So, and that has really, that has helped me so much. And it's helped my family, and it's helped other people in my life. And it helped me with my dad who's dying, and it helped him. And, that was amazing that we had that grief journey with him together as a family. And he didn't stop confessing for 2 weeks. So he was a bad lad, So it was a humbling and beautiful experience, even though it was sad, traumatic, and it stopped us all in our tracks, because you don't expect anybody to go, at whatever age, it still knocks you sideways. So
thank you, Sue. Thank
you're
you.
welcome.
That very honest answer. And it sounds as if death is kind of gives a horizon, in which you see everything else that that you do, in your living and in your work and everything. Thanks
Very
for
much
that.
so, like an anchor.
Yeah.
Mm.
Simon, how about you? How have your beliefs on death and possible afterlife impacted on the way you live, particularly on how you care for the dying or for the bereaved?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about how it shaped how I live, it's more the sense of God is with us always, through life and beyond it. So it's that presence of God and the compassion of God, that God cares for us in what we're going through, and showed that by coming as one of us in Christ, and in Jesus makes a way through death to be with God. So I think it's that in terms of how I live my life, it's not, oh, I'm going to be judged at the end of it. I must be good. I must keep the rules. It's not that. It's more a sense of relationships, being held in a network of relationships, and in the context of a relationship with God, which is eternal, but our relationships with others are held in that broader love of God. So I guess that sense of relationship characterizes how I live my life, and it's about wanting the best out of those relationships, wanting to have healthy, good relationships with people, rather than a sense of impending judgment. I think in terms of care of the bereaved, again, it's about that compassion. It's interesting because I think that thankfulness that Sue was talking about is an important part of that. At the hospice, I used to talk with people about, so if you were leaving the jungle, if you were voted off strictly, what would your good bits be? What are you going to look back on and give thanks for? And sometimes that thankfulness can lift us beyond the immediate circumstances of suffering and pain. And there's also something about reviewing identity, who we are. Sometimes that is about letting go of the roles we've had, by reflecting on them and giving thanks for them. And that can be part of the process, I think, of laying things down and coming to the end. In terms of talking about to bereaved people, that remembering the past is, I think, that remembering, sifting memories, sometimes sifting possessions and sorting things, is the way that we redraw our internal map. It's the processes which help us to kind of put photos in a mental photo album, or to work out what that person still means to us. And that's the process of grieving. Of course, it generates a whole load of different emotions, but it's that helping to remember, to be thankful for what it means, and then to move on.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah. One question that came in was to Sue, and there've been an accompanying question to Simon. And so you've touched upon this. The person asked, that some Buddhists meditate on death, and what do you get from that, and how does that affect your view on death? You've touched upon it, but you might want to say.
I will. I would like to say a bit more. When I first encountered this meditation, I was still scared of death. I'd had a lifelong fear of death, and it kept me awake at night when I was a child. I would sob myself to sleep at night thinking about the prospect of death and where would we go when we die and what happened. So that was still sort of lingering in the background when I went to my Buddhist meetings, and I started going shortly after my sister passed away. I think it was about a year later. And I remember them saying, Matt, and I thought I did a double take. I thought he can't have just said he's going to meditate on death. Oh, my goodness. And I did it. And I was remarkably comforted by it, because he led us through it was like a visualization, and the way he presented it to us, he led us through a scenario whereby we were preparing for our own death. And it was a beautiful building. It was a very old building, and there were candles all around, so it was a lovely atmosphere and a very sacred space. It felt really safe and warm and trusting. And he led us through, we just found out we were dying. What did we want to do? What did we want to change? What relationships did we want? Who did we want to make peace with? What were the most important things to us in that critical moment when we knew we were going to be leaving the earthly plane and going elsewhere, whatever your belief system believes you're going to? And it was so powerful and so profound. I think I immediately felt calmer about the prospect of this life ending and then the continuation, whatever that might be. And I've used that meditation many times, and I've adapted a little bit myself in little groups, the one in university in particular, and that was really powerful. And two people from that group went on to attend Buddhist classes, not the same ones as me, but they started on that path of wanting to know more about it. I'm not sure whether they stuck with it, but it was powerful. And the thing, it's live each day as if it keeps coming back to me. When I was doing that meditation at the Friends of the Earth meeting house, that was my visualization. This could be the last day you're going to spend with this person. How are you going to treat them? What do you want them to know? What richness can you bring to this experience while you're still here? And it's really powerful, and it does inform, even now after 28 years, it's still as powerful when I do that as it was. And doing it in a group in particular with people who've never experienced it before, and like I say, Buddhism's not a religion, it's a path. And they're just seeds of goodness, really, that we all have. Some, we cultivate them and bring them to the fore. And simplicity is key.
Well, maybe when we're able to return to gathering physically again, I'm sure there'd be some at the church who would value hear more about that, and maybe even having going through that meditation with you, Sue. If
absolutely, I'd be very, 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 very happy to do that. It'd be great.
I see at least one thumb up and a few nods. So yeah,
definitely.
That'd be fab. Thanks, Sue.
Delighted.
And Simon, a kind of a corollary question. Within Christianity, is there a temptation to focus or to compartmentalize, on just the life or just the death or just the rising of Jesus? And if there is, how do we mitigate against that? How do we weave that together in our wider theology?
Nice, simple one, Phil. Thank you. I think, as you might imagine, from what I've already said, I don't think you can divorce the dying of Jesus from the rest of what we know about God, what God's doing in Jesus. I think the thing is that the way that humans work, we try to make sense, and the death of Jesus makes no sense. What sense is there in a savior being nailed to a cross? How is that in any way what was hoped for from the Messiah, or how in any way can the death of a first century Jew affect our lives now? And so what each generation or thought world has done is try to make sense of that in some ways. So when a lot of the world was feudal, and the offense was less about what actually you did than who you'd offended, that it was worse to offend the king than it was to offend your neighbor, then it was all seen in terms of satisfaction, and that Jesus paid the price for the tear in the moral universe that was done by Adam stealing God's fruit. You know, when everything was about crime and punishment was about the punishment you received, then Jesus paid the price for our sins. In Roman thought, you know, when everything was about the fine or the punishment you had. But what I'd prefer, what those things tend to do is to leave humanity on the sidelines. This is something between God and the self-sacrifice of Jesus. But if we see it as part of a dynamic, then it can change, because it's something that we then participate in by following the way of Jesus. So there's just a line in Luke's gospel. Well, no, it's not just in Luke actually, but in the Transfiguration, certainly in Mark's gospel, he says he was talking with Moses and Elijah about the departure he was going to make in Jerusalem. That's the translation. But in the Greek, it's the Exodus he was going to make. And you think of the story of the Exodus, it's going through the Red Sea, freed from slavery towards the promised land, through the sea, which represents chaos and death. And for me, the story of Jesus is about God coming down to earth, and we're going to celebrate that at Christmas, and then going through death to make a way to new life with God forever. And that's the Exodus moment, going through death to new life. And the resurrection's there as a sign that this is what's happened. And for me, that's about an invitation for us to follow that way of living that Jesus showed, that way through death that Jesus showed, that way to new life which Jesus makes. And Jesus is the way maker rather than the one who pays the price.
That's not a bad answer to that question. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Simon. Time is rapidly running away from us, as time tends to. So I just wonder if there is if either of you have a brief final thought or something that you had wanted to say that we haven't got round to. Now is the time to say it. So first of all, Sue, if there was a final thought from you.
There is a final thought, because I've gathered a few thoughts since I first sat down. My final thought is that a lot of people are taught that there's stages of grief, which I touched on earlier. And one of somebody I've been inspired by for many years is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a really groundbreaking book called On Death and Dying. And she completely turned the theoretical underpinnings of that topic on its head for me, because she said, the people we meet in who have experienced grief, they are teaching us about their unique experience of grief. And she identifies 5 stages. My final point is, you can go through all those final 5 stages, and I'll read them out because I have jotted them down somewhere. So, where am I? Where have I gone? I am sorry.
No, you're back. You're back.
Right. So Elizabeth, and they're in no particular order, and they can ebb and flow and come and go like the tide. They're not, it's not a stage to follow. So she names denial, anger, depression, acceptance, and bargaining as 5 particular stages of what people experience when they've lost somebody. I would say you can feel all of those in an hour, and you can feel none of them for months. And it's so unique to the person that it defies really that you can't really theorize about it, because it's so unique to them in time and space. And that's my final point, because that's the thing I've learned the most. And also not to talk about my own experience of loss to anybody who I'm in a relationship in a counselling sense. And I learned that from a mistake in mentioning my own loss, to think it would be a good thing, but it wasn't, because people obviously are compassionate and loving, and then they were concerned about me. So then it became about me rather than about them. And I learned that many, many years ago. And that's always in my mind when I meet somebody for the first time. So they were my final thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Simon, final thought?
Not sure I got one, but I think
Top
I
three
think,
then.
yeah. I think it's how we could. It's more of a question. It's how do we combine this stuff that we've been talking about, which is quite interpersonal, with some of the public policy stuff. When I was asked to do this and thinking about this, I just heard that New Zealand had a referendum about allowing euthanasia. And when I was talking with people at the hospice, they said, wherever you draw the line, there's going to be things fall either side of it. And it's how far over do you want the line? And so I think it's just that somehow we need to take the compassionate way we've been talking into those public debates, which tend to get then very get quite distorted. And it's the same about the death penalty or things like that, where you think we've made a decision and come to a conclusion, but it keeps coming back because it deals with deep human differences. And so it's kind of spiraling the conversation out in a different way, but just saying that I don't know what happened in the discussion groups, but we haven't really touched that public policy area. And I guess that's surrounding COVID as well. You know, what price is the saving of lives? And we've been talking about each life as a universe, which is precious. And somehow we need to keep hold of that when we're talking about public policy in our country or on the other side of the world, or in dealing with unnecessary deaths of children. Just one little story. Been in Rill a couple of years, and after the new year, they discovered a couple that had died from a drugs overdose between Christmas and New Year in a flat in Rill. And between them was a 2-year-old that hadn't been able to survive without anybody to look after them. And you can still feel the emotion of it now in what I'm saying. That those kind of things, you know, is whenever we think we've got this taped, something happens that completely confounds us.
Thank you, Simon. That's given us a lot to think about.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It wasn't a good place to end it, was it?
No, we'll go on to other things in a second. But I think you've also identified something that you know, we're still new to these discussion evenings, and it might be that it's helpful to have more feedback from the groups rather than just questions that they might have, to hear the things that come up, and especially with this issue. So once we've stopped recording, which it will be soon, if anyone wants to stay on and share what or ask any questions, you're free to. I know some people will have to go because, you know, we did say we'd finish at 9, but if others want to stay on, I'll certainly be here, and maybe others will too. Almost finishing then with Sue and Simon then. But before we do, are there any books, any other kind of resources? We've heard quite a few, but that you'd recommend for us for further reading in this area, either for professional or academic side, or for the personal help when it comes to our own grief? Sue.
Right, my very favourite book is by a Zen Buddhist monk, and his name is Thich Nhat Hanh, and he wrote a story called Peace is Every Step, and it's been my constant companion for a long, long time, and it's beautiful, and it covers everything from death, loss, dying, life, compassion. It's just living mindfully in the moment. I know it's quite a buzzword at the moment, mindfulness, but it's nothing highfalutin really. It just means that we spend our time trying to be fully present in the moment and allowing feelings to come and go like clouds. And Tay, as they call him affectionately, he was now 94 and not in great health, but he's still around. And is just beautiful. It's simplicity in that book, and it's just like talking to a friend, and it's beautiful. So I would recommend anybody who does enjoy a book and always interested in maybe cultivating mindfulness in their lives, in even in a very small way, because it doesn't mean sitting for hours meditating. Tay is a great advocate for moving meditation, and he advocates walking, washing the dishes mindfully, cooking and eating mindfully. There's so many ways you can incorporate it into your life to bring more peace and calm and loving kindness and compassion as well. So it's a great book.
Thanks, Sue. Knowing this lot, I think you had them at cooking and eating mindfully. And Simon, how about you? Any resources or books or anything you'd recommend?
Well, I mentioned a couple in my introduction. One was Dying Well by Ira Byock. There's a website as well. Takes different stories or accounts of people's grieving or dying and uses them to draw out different things. So it's like a series of stories, but it's also a window on things. And this little book, Some, which I mentioned, is a really interesting book with just making you think about your own assumptions about the afterlife. A couple of other books, partly just because of the title, Befriending Death by James Woodward. That's got a series of meditations in as well. And then for people who do funerals, Funerals and How to Improve Them by Tony Walter. It's a book which was written in 1990, so it's old news in a way, but it's about funerals being life-centered, celebrating lives rather than just pronouncing religious dogma.
Fab.
Wonderful.
Right. Well, we will thank Simon and Sue in a second. But a couple of other things before we do. Next month, which is very soon actually. It's just in a fortnight's time. On the I can't see now. On the 14th.
I've got a nice poster where your face just with the cross.
Wonderful. With a cross, and it should have a minaret.
Yeah.
And it's because on Monday the 14th, we're going to the title is, as we're entering the nativity, the Christmas season, there's something about Jesus, and we're going to hear from Dr. Mansour Ali, who's a lecturer in Islamic studies at Cardiff University, and some Reverend Ray Vincent, Christian author and Baptist minister, and good friend, and they'll be sharing their perspectives on the person of Jesus. So that's the next one, 14th of December. Put it in the diaries now, spread the word. I would like to thank Bethan for putting out the advertising for these, put the posters together for these events. We thank Claire for doing the Zooming and the facilitating and calming me when technology goes against me, as it tends to. We thank all the Zoomers for participating. And we most especially thank Simon and Sue. I have found, we can see from people's reactions now, this conversation so incredibly helpful. There's so much. I think we need a weekend on this at the very least. You've been very generous in what you've shared, both personally and in your professional experiences. So we are hugely thankful, and I'm sure we'll come back to a lot of these things in the future. So thank you to Simon and Sue. We don't bribe or pay for our guest speakers, but we do make a donation to their local food bank. So we shall make sure Ponty gets a top up. I shall end for now, but feel free, those on Zoom, to stay on, with a quote by the Anglo-American author Susan Ertz, who one of her quotes says, "Millions long for immortality who don't know what to do with themselves on a rainy Sunday afternoon." So may you make the most of your misty mornings, your rainy afternoons, and your icy evenings. May you keep well, be blessed, brilliant, and beautiful. And we shall return here in a fortnight. But for now, we'll say, especially to the YouTubers, goodbye.
Goodbye.